It is Monday, October 14th, 2024. I am Zach Brnett. With me are Doug Samuels and John Brice. Scott Roussel is not with us, but the Football Scoop podcast rolls on. And gentlemen, we have a little bit of a special episode, not only in that Scott's gone, but that I left my living room to experience college football in person for the first time. And before we get going, I want to ask you, gentlemen, among the great rivalry games, which ones have you attended? Doug, we'll start with you.
Michigan State is the I think the one I've been a part of. We had season tickets growing up, so that was me and my brother got to rotate each year on who got to go to the Michigan State game. Quick nugget: I was supposed to be in attendance for the 1 second left Michigan versus Michigan State game. That was my year to go. I was in a championship flag football tournament, so I opted to go to that instead. But we had front row seats in the back of that end zone that TJ Duckett caught the winning touchdown, controversial winning touchdown on, and front page of the paper the next day, and very pixelated. You could see Dad and my brother hanging over the edge in the background, high-fiving everyone. But that's the game I should have been at. But instead, I went to a flag football game. Big regret in life right there.
How about you, JB?
That's pretty awesome, Doug. That's a good memory. I've been to a number of Tennessee, Alabama games, Georgia, Auburn. I have been to Notre Dame SC, been to Notre Dame, Michigan, at Michigan. I'm trying to think what else. Army, Navy, which I know Doug got to experience last year as well. That's pretty freaking hard to top. So those are. I've been to Bama, LSU, and Death Valley, and a couple other compelling rivalries, LSU, Auburn, and Death Valley. So those are the ones that come to the forefront right away that have been pretty incredible experiences and left a lasting impression.
So I have not been to many of the marquee rivalry games outside of this one, so I can't sit here and say Red River is definitively better than the Iron Bowl, Michigan, Ohio State, what have you. I will say there's nothing – none of those games are like this one. The only game that could probably compare would be Army-Navy in terms of the pageantry, but Army-Navy is not played in the middle of the state fair, 50% of the equidistant from each school in an old stadium. It is just – if you guys ever have the opportunity, any of our listeners ever have the opportunity, if you don't care – one bit about either one of these teams, you still owe it to yourself to go to this game. Getting into the game is horrendous. You have a state fair going on, and then 100,000, 200,000 extra people trying to get into a stadium built in the 1920s. The stadium itself is very antiquated. It's lacking. They ran out of water in the middle of the game. It's lacking bathrooms. It's lacking concessions. It's still an incredible experience. You're on top of the action. There's no BS. It's nothing but the stands and the field. And the atmosphere leading up to that game is unlike anything else in American sports. So you have the entire state of Oklahoma, what it feels like, the entire state of Texas, jammed into an old football stadium. The swings of emotion in that game, when a bad play happens and your enemies are cheering their heads off, it feels like you're drowning and suffocating at the same time. And in the very next play, the dynamic can completely flip. So I had the opportunity to take my 11-year-old son, and it was a bucket list day for us. As for the game itself, the first quarter went about exactly to script for Oklahoma. The first three plays were a sack and an interception. Texas went 3 and out, I believe, its next two possessions. The first quarter, yardage-wise, was 54-15 in Oklahoma's favor. And so that was the good news for the Sooners. The bad news was it was 3-0. And you had the feeling that once Texas found its footing, it was the scoreboard was going to flip tremendously, and that's basically what happened. Texas had a 3rd and 6 to DeAndre Moore down the sideline, set up their first score. Got a nifty play call by Sark to bring everyone to the right and then throw a throwback screen to the tight end to the left. It made it 7-3 Texas, and that was pretty much ball game. Once they forced 2 fumbles, it was kind of an avalanche second quarter in favor of the Longhorns. They made it 21-3 at halftime. And then Texas got at that point, it was obvious Oklahoma had no I mean, Kirk Herbstreit said in the game that it's impossible. It's hard to see Oklahoma scoring in this game. To get 5, they could get 5 yards. They couldn't get 10. I think their longest play of the game was 15 yards, and they just did not have the ability to string together a drive. And then Texas drove down 21-3 early third quarter and went for a 4th and 2, well within the red zone, because it was like, well, why not? Oklahoma can't score on us. So that was the stands started clearing out. It was not much of a game, but it was still an incredible a day of college football just to be at that game. Did you guys get to see much of that one?
I saw a decent amount of it. I was actually in the press box at Notre Dame for their evisceration of Stanford at the same time, but I still was checking out Texas OU and watching on the iPad. And I've said before, I thought going into the season, Texas was the top-ranked team. I still think Texas is the top-ranked team. I probably think that even more so after this weekend. I thought Ohio State was maybe positioned to be a challenger to the Longhorns. I didn't see enough of that, enough from them, from the Buckeyes over the weekend. So I just think they're really complete. They're very solid. They don't necessarily always wow you, but they've got really good stature on the lines of scrimmage. And I just think they're a really complete, very, very good football team.
We here at Football Scoop are going to be covering an offensive coordinator change at Oklahoma in November and December. I'm not here reporting that, and that's just what logic tells me. Brent Venables cannot bring back the same crew next season. He will absolutely lose the fan base, lose the donors. They cannot continue what they're doing offensively. Max Olson from ESPN had the stat that they're something like the third least explosive offense of the decade. Oklahoma is, and this is a place that invented modern offensive football in a lot of ways. So I guess the question is, how big do the changes happen? But there's going to be changes offensively for Oklahoma. There's just no other way around it. So the game I got to see the very end of from the concourse at the Cotton Bowl was a lot more entertaining than I think a lot of us anticipated, and that is Alabama, South Carolina. Doug, did you get eyes on that one?
I did quite a bit. I thought very much in the same vein as you. I don't think most of us saw that one coming. I think Alabama has some really big problems on defense that need to be addressed. I think going into the fourth quarter, Lenora Sellers was like 17-20. Like to have that kind of efficiency throwing the ball against an Alabama defense is I mean, you want to pull your hair out watching it. So I do think Shane Beamer's team is probably better than a lot of us give him credit for. His defensive line, especially those edge rushers, are as good of a tandem as there is in college football. And I think one of them was a freshman. So didn't see that one coming at all. Alabama still doesn't know who they are, and that should not have been as close of a game as it was.
No, and frankly, Alabama in a lot of ways I felt like was really fortunate to win that contest. I just thought that South Carolina, for most of the game, thoroughly outplayed the Tide. They finished with about 60-plus yards more total offense than Alabama. Jalen Milroe had 2 interceptions, and you're right, Doug. Lenora Sellers was electric through 3 quarters and still finished with a really respectable 23-31 stat line for well over 200 yards and a throw in there, and then did some damage with his legs as well. This South Carolina team, from having the lead against LSU and blowing it to having a double-digit lead against the Tide and blowing it, it's tough. We'll see how Beamer does holding things together, and then just the clock mismanagement at the end. And I think you tweeted about it, Doug, and said Beamer ball, because the Gamecocks did recover the onside kick, and that looked like it was in slow motion, like an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where they throw the stick of dynamite and it just sort of tumbles over, because you had guys falling over one another to finally recover it. And it looked like we were going to get an even more captivating finish. And then the Gamecocks just sort of fizzled out. But it's 2 teams with identity crises coming up now for the third weekend in October rivalry this week at Neyland Stadium between Tennessee and Alabama, because the Vols are really, really good on defense and really disjointed on offense, and we're seeing a bit more of the opposite in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, let's go into that. Let's skip ahead to that Florida-Tennessee game. It was 3-0. I'm of the mind that any win over Florida is good for Tennessee, considering they've won 2 out of the last 19 in this series. And to come from behind and win like they do, obviously you prefer that to the alternative. But John, what's wrong with Tennessee's offense?
Well, they're pretty terrible on the offensive line, first and foremost, and that's the key thing. And then I just don't think that they have an offensive identity right now. They're not playing with the tempo that they grew accustomed to under Josh Heupel and Alex Golesh. I think it's been a more difficult transition to Joey Halsey than was anticipated. And then Nico Iamaleava is going through some of those redshirt freshman growing pains. Now, he's been on campus for 22 months. I thought it was a disservice a year ago that Tennessee's coaches didn't get him more playing time, especially with the 5-game rule. He ended up only starting the bowl game against Iowa after Joe Milton declared that he was going to sit it out in preparation for the NFL draft. So I just think you're seeing growing pains for the quarterback in a really tough conference to experience growing pains. And then beyond that, he's not got an offensive line that's doing him enough favors to kind of navigate those growing pains. They're still getting dudes open downfield. Nico has made some of those throws earlier in the season. He's not making them now. Can you imagine a Josh Heupel offense has been shut out for the entire first half in back-to-back weeks, and not against Bama and Georgia or Texas and Georgia, but against Arkansas and Florida. And so they just got to really shore some things up on the offense, the offensive line. There's no free agency mid-season. They've got to kind of work with what they've got. And I think they've got, again, I've referenced this before, 6-year walk-on Dane Davis, who plays a pretty significant role for them at times along the offensive front. You should not have that happening. Credit to him for sticking it out, but he should be a starter on your field goal unit or PAT unit and not an every down offensive lineman.
They seem like a team just 2 years ago. They were a team that could take the top off any defense, and their choice route stuff, stretching the field horizontally and vertically, they really excelled at. And this year they just don't seem to have that same pop, that same deep threat ability. I feel like they've got a lot of really great speed on that roster, but for whatever reason, it's not jiving with Nico. And I don't know what the answer is. There hasn't been huge schematic changes there in Knoxville, but they're just not connecting like they had been.
Yeah, and they've still got Brew McCoy and Dante Thornton on the roster, along with Squirrel White and Chaz Nimrod. So there's still some weapons there at the wideout position. Dylan Sampson is probably one of the more underrated tailbacks in the SEC. He has really shown some strong flashes and been capable and very reliable for them. Again, I just don't think they have an offensive identity. And then conversely, Florida, it felt like the Arkansas game a week ago, the Arkansas-Tennessee game, when Arkansas had lived the entire first half in Tennessee territory and had just 3 points to show for it. And Florida had 3 red zone trips and only had 3 points to show for it at the half, including fumbling into the end zone on 1st and goal at the 1, and then also having a chance late to get maybe an extra field goal before the half for a 6-0 lead, and just completely botching that entire sequence. And then, of course, Graham Mertz hurt in that game. They went to DJ Lagway. He looked good. The throw he made to send the game into overtime was a grown man throw, and it looked like the Gators had Tennessee in some trouble there with an unorthodox 2-point conversion. And whether they got it or didn't get it, I really wanted to see that play because I don't know what the heck they were going to do, but it looked like a lot of fun. Tennessee used the defensive timeout. Billy Napier elected to kick the extra point, and then they missed a 42-yard field goal in overtime, and Tennessee quickly scored a touchdown. So the Vols will take a lot of confidence from the way they closed out the game. And to your point, Zach, you're exactly right. That's the first time Tennessee has won 2 in a row at home against the Gators since 1990 and 1992.
Doug, to your point, I've said this about Gus Malzahn before. I'm gonna borrow a term in baseball. There's a term, a true outcome hitter, where it's either a home run, a walk, or a strikeout. It seems like Gus Malzahn's offense operates that way, and a lot Josh Heupel's is the same. Either they're rolling, putting up 50 points, or they're struggling to get to 20. There's just not a lot of ability to hit singles and doubles within his offense. They're either hitting home runs or they're striking out, it seems.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Speaking of home runs or strikeouts, Garrett Nussmeier threw the ball 51 times for LSU on Saturday night. Completed only 22 of them. However, those 22 completions went for 337 yards, including a 23-yarder with 27 seconds left to send the game to overtime, and then a 25-yarder to Kyron Lacey to win it. This was the game I think we all hoped for and the one we all anticipated. At least for me, it's the one I picked. LSU delivers what I think is a death blow for Ole Miss this season. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Ole Miss unequivocally has to run the table at this point to be in the CFP conversation. That certainly seems really hard to do with Georgia still set to come to Oxford in a couple of weeks. And for all of Oklahoma's offensive woes, the Sooners do have a very sturdy defense and the type of defense that could give this Ole Miss team problems, because we saw Ole Miss really struggle with that Kentucky defense. The Kentucky and Oklahoma defenses, I think, are a little bit similar. And then Ole Miss's offense didn't exactly scorch the earth against an LSU defense that Brian Kelly has been very candid in saying, we're not very good, but we are getting better. So it was Ole Miss is not as season over as USC is right now, but Ole Miss is season on the brink, and it's tougher when you have so many transfer starters on both sides of the football, I think, to keep the buy-in there, to keep the engagement, and to get through the season. So this is as tough of coaching juncture as Lane Kiffin will have been at since he took over at Ole Miss in 2020, in my opinion.
And he's a guy who's admitted, I don't think it's possible to build great culture in college football these days. The guys are too transient. You don't have time to do that. So I'm going to take him at his word and believe that Ole Miss does not have great culture with a large percentage of guys that have not been there very long. So how good is Ole Miss going to be relative to their best moving forward when they believe their season is largely over? They have to win out, as Jackson Dart said, to make the playoff, which means when you have to beat Georgia or your season's a failure, that's a tough position to be in. And you look at what has Lane Kiffin, what's a win Lane Kiffin has to hang your hat on so far now in his fifth season. They have a very he's raised the floor of Ole Miss, but the ceiling is still kind of where the ceiling was when he got there. They did beat LSU at home last season. That's probably their best win outside of beating Penn State in the Peach Bowl last season. And I think we're looking at Ole Miss as one of the biggest disappointments in college football for a team that a lot of people thought was a automatic playoff team.
Yeah, I think our fearless leader had them, number 6 preseason. They really have a shot to go all the way this year. So you got to bring that up.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. And look, to the point about their schedule, I think it's an open date for the Rebels this week. And then Oklahoma comes calling, and then they go to Arkansas. Look, we just saw Arkansas beat a Tennessee team that was playing incredibly well at the time at home. That Ole Miss-Arkansas rivalry is a very long-running rivalry that's had a lot of dramatic moments through the years. And then the aforementioned Georgia game. It's hard to think that Ole Miss is done losing. That's the way I kind of evaluate some of these schedules. And I said it after some teams suffered some very damaging first losses, that the problem there is that they've lost all margin for error, and it's hard to see them be done losing. And I don't think Ole Miss is done losing. And the next loss officially eliminates Ole Miss from CFP contention in my mind.
So if we're looking at the top tier of SEC teams, I think Texas is as good as everybody thought they were going to be. Texas A&M looks like they're as good as their rosier projections. But outside of that, Georgia's more vulnerable than we thought they were going to be. Alabama is not the team we thought they were going to be. Oklahoma is certainly not the team we thought they were going to be. Ole Miss is not the team we thought they were going to be. Tennessee looked really good early. Now they look extremely vulnerable. So that leads us to LSU, similar to A&M in that they lost their opener and then haven't lost since then. And by process of elimination, they're now a half game out of first place in the SEC. Their schedule coming up is not easy. They're at Arkansas this week, at A&M the week after, bye week, and then Alabama at home, and then they close with at Florida, home against Vanderbilt, home against Oklahoma. We've now risen from LSU as maybe a 10% chance to make the playoff to now 40, 50, shoot, even 60% chance to make the playoff in a season where you've lost your Heisman Trophy winner and your offensive coordinator, your stud receivers from the most explosive offense in college football. You also lost your defensive staff by choice, bringing in a whole new staff. This is kind of a house money season for Brian Kelly that's coming back as good as he could possibly hope for.
Yeah. I think that 3-game stretch of Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Alabama, if the Bayou Bengals find a way to win 2 of those 3, I think they're going to end up being a playoff team, because while they do have 1 loss already, it's not a conference loss. And so they are sitting in a very good, envious position amongst SEC standings. And if you're a team that ends up playing for an SEC championship in this non-divisional world of the league, then I think if you play for an SEC championship, you're going to get a bid into the CFP.
Yeah, I think if LSU can somehow copy this game plan or this approach from this past weekend and let Garrett Nussmeier chuck it all over the yard. I mean, I can't, looking back at the game, I can't remember a completion he had under 5 yards. I think he averaged like 15 yards of completion. Deep crossing routes, fade balls, deep outs. Like he was sprinkling it all over the place. And Scott's been saying that since week 1. Like he's a guy that wants to push the ball down the field. So LSU has the talent on their roster to be able to do that. I say let them loose, and they're going to see some really good defensive football these next few weeks. And if Alabama continues to be as porous throwing the ball defensively as they showed this past weekend, it could be really interesting here in a couple of weeks.
All right, let's leave the SEC and move to Big Ten country. And by that, I mean California and Oregon. I got 0 eyes on this game, given that I was at another game. How the heck did USC lose that game to Penn State?
A 2-touchdown lead multiple times. I think it was 17-3 and 20-6 at different points. 20-6 at halftime, I believe. I thought Lincoln Riley, and I don't know if Doug saw it, so I want to get his comments if he did. I thought Lincoln Riley really badly mismanaged the end of the game. They were at around midfield, and he was deliberately bleeding clock, just looking to set up for what would have been a long field goal. And, it's one thing in the NFL, I think, to set up and feel like you're going to win with a 50-yard field goal. I don't think that's the case in college football more often than not, and they wasted a lot of time. And then finally, on a 3rd and 6 play from around the 45, the quarterback overthrew his wideout. Penn State intercepted, had 6 seconds left, ran out the clock, and then USC disintegrated in overtime, and Penn State executed in overtime.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State had that tight end, Tyler Warren, that had just an absolute career day. It seemed like Andy Kotelnicki emptied the bag of tricks to keep him in this one. I mean, from shifting into the swinging gate formation to the Tyler Warren takes over as the center and then also catches the ball. Like they went deep in their bag of tricks for this one to keep things alive. But yeah, I didn't catch the end of it. I think I was flipping through a couple other games, but I mean, when you have a tight end with 17 receptions for over 200 yards, that's as impressive as a performance I've seen from a tight end in a long, long time.
And one more thing I would note, because we've talked about it at length, when the USC defense couldn't get off the field and was powerless to stop the opposition in its road losses at Michigan and at Minnesota, it was a very similar case in this game. The Trojans should have had this game won multiple instances in the closing minutes, but instead Penn State found a way to convert a 4th and 14 and I believe also a 4th and 12. And they weren't fluke plays where guys just made sensational transcendent plays that changed the games. They got good protection, and he found open receivers. Drew Aller found open receivers. So in a game that Drew Aller threw 3 interceptions that I think matched his career total coming into that game, the Nittany Lions found a way to stay unbeaten, and USC once again found a way to lose, and their season is over. They're a 3-loss team. There's still meat on that schedule. They're cooked.
USC is 1-3 in the Big Ten and led all 3 losses in the 4th quarter. And I believe had the ball with a lead in all 3 losses in the 4th quarter. So the 2 words that are going to be on top of the tombstone of the Lincoln Riley era at USC is going to be "we're close." And I know everyone's tired of hearing it from him, but at the same time, he's not wrong. They ran the ball for 8 yards a carry and 189 yards against USC, or against Penn State, excuse me. Ran the ball really at will and also forced 3 turnovers while giving up only 1. I believe the amount of teams that do that and go on to lose the game is like 5% or something like that. Like the numbers were extremely in their favor that to go out and lose the game. He's not wrong that they're close. They are close. So the question is, how are you building a team that's good enough to where you should beat Michigan, Minnesota? They should be undefeated right now, and they're 3-3. So the question is, what are you doing wrong to manage these games to make us lose?
Yeah, we're close. We'll work at Minnesota or UAB or some of those other kind of places, Iowa, Iowa State. That excuse doesn't work at USC in year 3 or 4, whatever we're into the Lincoln Riley era. That ain't gonna work.
Yeah, UAB. It's not like it's Alabama.
Yeah, exactly. Agreed.
Side note: UAB is not close. Holy disaster. Moving along.
Agreed.
Okay, so the big game of the day, as we get 26 minutes into to our podcast, now we're on to the big game of the day. Oregon outlasts Ohio State, and I do mean outlasts. 2 questions. One, was the pass interference the right call? The offensive pass interference on Jeremiah Smith. And 2, do we think significantly different about either one of these teams after Oregon beats Ohio State by 1 point at Autzen Stadium?
1, I think it absolutely was the right call. He came out and looked like he was blocking him for a second, like a big shove, and turn around and catch the ball. That was absolutely pass interference. No question about it. To me, I know Ryan Day gets a lot of crap for being 1-7 against top 5 teams or whatever he is, and hasn't been able to win the big one. And I get it. I don't think people's opinion changes with this one. I think both teams are national championship caliber, definitely playoff teams. To me, the story of this one was Chip Kelly. Like, without Chip Kelly, Ohio State's not in this game. I mean, veteran play calling, veteran leadership. With all due respect to Brian Hartline, if Brian Hartline's the offensive play caller, they're not in this game, and they're not in the position they were in. So I felt terrible for Will Howard, knowing that that Ohio State fan base is going to eat him alive until he gets his redemption moment. But he stepped into that last drive with every opportunity to go down as an Ohio State legend, and that doesn't come around very often. And as he's scrambling, I'm just screaming at the TV, get down, get down, get down. He just got down too late, and kind of, with that, kind of pissed away the chance. So he'll go down in infamy for that. But, I think the Buckeyes season outlook, I mean, they're a playoff team. They're very, very good as long as they can stay healthy. So he'll get a chance at redemption.
Yeah, I think for me, I probably think a lot more of Oregon coming out of that game, just because I had not been overly impressed with the Ducks. And that's not to take away from Boise State, because I think we probably believe Boise State is the class of the group of 5 and is on its way to being a playoff team and having a Heisman Trophy finalist, if not the winner, in Ashton Jeanty. But Dylan Gabriel, to me, played the best game of his career anywhere he's ever been quarterback. The home field advantage was a key. That's about as good as I've seen Autzen Stadium. I've been there in person. It wasn't nearly that good of an atmosphere when I was there, just an elite atmosphere. And so I think a little bit more of Oregon for sure. I probably think a little bit less of Ohio State, because I felt had that been a neutral site game, I liked Ohio State by double digits. And I think Ohio State is the more talented team. I think that Dan Lanning's team looked tougher mentally and physically. And then Ohio State absolutely should still be a playoff team, but they've got an open date this week. Makes a lot of sense after having that cross-country flight. And then they've got 6 consecutive weeks of playing, and 4 of those weeks are Nebraska, Penn State, Indiana, and then the rivalry game with Michigan to close the years and to close the year. So Nebraska and Indiana are vastly improved. Obviously, Penn State is looking to make another statement when the time comes around. They remain undefeated. And then the Michigan game, there will be immense pressure on the Buckeyes in that game, because Michigan is not very good this year, but Ohio State has lost to them 3 years in a row.
So I went on this podcast, this very podcast, and said that it was more likely Ohio State won the game by multiple touchdowns and Oregon won it by 1 point, and Oregon won it by 1 point. So clearly, I think more of Oregon than I did going in, and I think less of Ohio State. Dylan Gabriel, 23 of 34, 341 yards, and even 10 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no picks, a 95.9 grade on ESPN's QBR out of 100. Plus 32 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground. He's not going to win the Heisman, but a Heisman-worthy performance by him. I simply did not think Gabriel's – I didn't think Gabriel would have the time to push the ball down the field the way he did. I thought Ohio State's defensive line underperformed, and I didn't think Oregon's wide receivers would be able to get the separation they did against the Ohio State secondary. So kudos to Oregon there. Let's talk about the in-game sequence. Doug, do you think there's any way it was an accident that Oregon had 12 players on the field with 10 seconds of play? And if you're Ohio State in that situation, NBC had the shot of Ryan Day screaming at the ref. They have 12 on the field. If you're Will Howard in that situation, or if you're Ryan Day trying to get to Will Howard, like, how do you handle that if you're on offense and Oregon's trying to bend the rule book their way against you?
Yeah, so I initially thought, I kind of go back and forth on this. I initially thought there was no way that, Ryan Day or Dan Lanning in Oregon did that on purpose. But then you see how they subbed the guy in, and it was like, as everyone's lining up, like they sneak this other guy on the field. They're kind of like pushing him out there from one view. But then, so did they do it on purpose? Maybe. But then you also got to think, in order to do that, you also have to know somehow that a veteran offensive coordinator like a Chip Kelly, or a veteran offensive guy like Chip Kelly, is not going to have a plan to go right away as soon as the ball's set. And I don't think that's accurate. So I don't think they did it on purpose. I think in order to do that, you would have to know, hey, these guys are going to scramble to get something else in. So I wouldn't give Dan Lanning all that credit, because there's got to be some things that come after that in order for that to be accurate.
And then the final play was 6 seconds ago. Obviously, they're aware of the situation. But if you're Ryan Day in that situation, what's your coaching point to Will Howard to not allow what happened to happen?
I mean, you've either got to throw the ball quick or get down quick. Like, it can't be a long, drawn-out play. As he sat there in the pocket for 2, 3, and then he takes off. I mean, at that point, you knew there was no way he was going to get down. They were going to call the ball down and get a timeout. There wasn't enough time for that. So it's got to be a quick hitting play. It can't be something that takes 4 seconds to develop.
All right, so that's the major action of the game, of the day. Excuse me. Let's move on to other games. John, you were at Notre Dame, Stanford. Not a close game. Not expected to be a close game. What are your takeaways from that one?
Yeah, Notre Dame is finally looking more efficient on offense. Riley Leonard now gone 3 games or so without throwing an interception. Nearly 100 pass attempts now without an interception. I thought Mike Denbrock called his best game of the 6 for the Irish, to just give them some different opportunities. They stretched the field more vertically. Even when Bo Collins, the Clemson transfer, had a fumble early, they went right back to him, and also went right back to him on a deep shot. I think those are just micro moments that become important over the course of the game and the course of the season. Notre Dame's still dealing with new injuries. It seems like every week there's a chance they've got some more significant injuries coming on the defensive side of the ball yet again. We'll get an update later today, I guess, when Marcus Freeman meets the media about some of those. So Notre Dame is a bit of the walking wounded. They've got at Georgia Tech this week, and then a neutral site game against Navy at MetLife Stadium the week after that, and then a bye week, and they close out their season. Honestly, I was jumping around a little bit, continue to be more and more impressed every week with BYU, undefeated in the Big 12. Very, very convincing win against Arizona over the weekend. So that's a team that I think is really creeping into more and more legitimate CFP contention, and looking like they're getting really nice quarterback play. His name escapes me at the moment. James something, I believe.
Ratzliff?
Yeah, Ratzliff.
Like that.
Yeah. And then they're really physical on both lines of scrimmage. So there's a BYU Utah game coming up November 9th at Rice-Eccles Stadium that's going to be absolutely massive.
You know, it's funny. The Big 12 had the reputation of every game being 52-50 for a while, and obviously that was earned. But now you're looking at the teams that are at the top of that conference are the most physical teams, starting with Friday night, Arizona State muscle past Utah for a huge win late Friday night. Kenny Dillingham continues to be must-see television after Arizona State wins, which is now happening more often than any of us anticipated. I loved him saying after the game, like, if you bet on the over for us, take your winnings and give them to the kids. Put it in our NIL program. That's a guy who keeps it real. You got to love what they're doing. And then out east, Iowa State went on the road and got a big win over West Virginia. That they remain undefeated and they continue playing excellent defense. It seems like every time I turn that game on, they were intercepting West Virginia's Garrett Green a different time. And then late, we had kind of a put up or shut up game. K-State got a topsy-turvy, hard-fought win. Avery Johnson left the game twice, but they outlasted Colorado to remain in the Big 12 championship race. Gentlemen, any thoughts there?
Was I the only one that picked that one right, I think, or did anyone else have K-State winning that?
I had Colorado.
I had the Buffs for sure. Shout out to Avery Johnson for taking a selfie on the sideline during the game. Like, a fan came up to him, and the visiting team bench is so close, handed him his phone. He took a selfie after a touchdown, handed the kid back his phone. So shout out. That's about as Joe Cool as it can get.
Almost like earlier in the season, there were some guys like saying hi or blowing kisses or something to cheerleaders after touchdowns. So maybe that's the next one that catches on.
Yeah. For me, watching that game very closely, Colorado couldn't get a stop when it needed to, had some coverage busts, and then obviously was dealing the most of the game without Travis Hunter on either side of the ball, a real blow. I know there were a couple other receivers injured for the Buffs during the game as well, but Travis Hunter being hurt, all it does is bolster the Heisman case for both Doug Samuel and Scott Russell's pick in Ashton Genty.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on the game, but I think we do need to talk about what happened on the sidelines at the Georgia-Mississippi State game where Kirby Smart shoved Michael Van Buren. Kirby claimed afterwards it was inadvertent and didn't realize who it was. Having said that, it was a head coach shoving an opposing player. What do we make of this? If you're Greg Sankey or the SEC, how do you handle this?
I think if you're the SEC and Greg Sankey, you have to not only examine it and do a thorough review, but you have to acknowledge it publicly. And Kirby Smart both said he didn't remember the play at all, and then also claimed he knew he was specifically trying to sub defensive personnel with his coordinator, Glenn Schumann. And, look, it wasn't a little get out of the way, I'm talking to this guy. It was a significant shove. Like, you could tell Michael Van Buren was stunned by it. I give Van Buren tremendous credit because he did not react in any sort of way other than to look back and be like, what is this guy doing? I just think that the SEC has to acknowledge it. I'm not going to sit here and call for a suspension of Kirby Smart. I don't think it's to that level, but I do think the SEC should probably issue a public reprimand.
Yeah, as someone who's been on the sideline and heated in different situations, I don't think there's any world where I can believe you're fired up and you make contact with someone in an opposing jersey with pads on and you don't remember it or know what was going on. Like that reasoning really didn't measure up for me. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What I think happens is Kirby comes out after he reviews the film and says, hey, I guess I do recall that or whatever. And it's just kind of a blip on the radar and we move on. I don't think it's, again, I agree with JB. This isn't like we need to suspend someone type of move, but it's something that Georgia has to address after seeing it make its rounds.
All right, we're at the 40-minute mark. We'll go around the horn with one game we have not mentioned that each of you would like to talk about. Since I put you on the spot, guys, I will start. I did not see a snap of this game, but it was Illinois 50, Purdue 49 in overtime. Illinois led this game 27-3 in the third quarter. Purdue had, in their last 26 offensive drives, had scored 1 touchdown. The second half, they had the ball 6 times, scored 5 touchdowns, and a field goal on the other. So I'm not going to sit here and say how that happened, but kudos to Purdue for making it happen. I know they've made changes at offensive coordinator and quarterback, so those changes clearly worked for them. John, what's a game we haven't mentioned that we should have?
Well, real quickly to tie that in, because I was monitoring that game because it was such a bonkers contest, and that is Illinois gave up 46 points after halftime to Purdue and still found a way to win the game. I don't think the Illini should have risen in the polls. If you give up 46 points, period, to this Purdue team, you've got real issues. When you do it after halftime, terrible, terrible, terrible. So that's my takeaway from that game. And I wonder how many teams have ever given up 46 points after halftime and found a way to win a game. So there is some merit of consolation there for Illinois. To me, it's Army. It's what the Black Knights are doing. It's Bryson Daly. He had 3 touchdowns in the first quarter on Saturday, 2 rushing, 1 throwing. They're 6-0, bowl eligible. Again, they're in a conference. There's a lot still more for the Black Knights to play for, but it's just fun to see them continuing to play the way that they're playing. And I wish that they would get a few more national showcase games, because Daly is the real deal doing things for them with his arm and his legs at the quarterback position.
Speaking of his arm, he had an absolute beast mode stiff arm in that game where he stiff armed, I think, a linebacker to the ground. Like Army and Navy both ranked for the first time since like 1960. That's one of those things that's just great for college football. For me, it was great to see Wisconsin get back on track, and especially offensively. They scored 42 points against a Rutgers squad that just 2 weeks ago was undefeated and clamoring to be in the top 25. But Braden Locke finally played a game, I think, up to his potential. A former Mississippi State player under Mike Leach. Finally, they were able to get something going. And Phil Longo and Luke Fickell have lost both transfer quarterbacks in the first 3 weeks of the season for 2 years in a row. They were down their top rusher, Chaz Malusi, that decided to step away, battling injuries. So for them to put 42 points up against a well-coached Rutgers team is a big deal. They've got Northwestern this week, and then 2 of the next 3 weeks, they've got top 5 teams. They got Penn State, a trip to Iowa, and then home against Oregon. So it could a tough remaining schedule here for Wisconsin, but it was good to see them get back on track.
Last one real quickly for me would be North Carolina, just abject disaster. Showed a lot of guts and grittiness to get that game tied up. Apparently, seeming for all the world, headed to overtime with Georgia Tech, which had to close out the game without Haynes King. And as Georgia Tech is just very clearly trying to run the ball and get it to overtime, the Tar Heel defense gives up a 70-yard run to lose after just a really the best performance of the year for the Tar Heels. So it's sad to see it going this way, but it's hard to see it getting any better for the Tar Heels.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for listening. That's it for the Football Scoop podcast. Everyone have a great week.